A young boy stands before the judge, his voice trembling, but what he says next makes the entire courtroom gasp. "You're my mom." Silence. Shock. And then, everything changes. Stay tuned for the unbelievable true story. The courtroom was cold, filled with the sterile scent of paper and polished wood. Judge Caroline Farrell sat behind the high bench, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. At 52, she had presided over countless cases, criminal trials, custody battles, and juvenile hearings. But something about this one felt different. Before her stood a boy, no older than 8, his frame small and fragile beneath the oversized, faded hoodie he wore. His skin was dark, his short curls unkempt, and his deep brown eyes held a sadness that seemed far too heavy for a child his age. He wasn't crying. He wasn't fidgeting. He simply stood there, looking at her. Judge Farrell cleared her throat and adjusted her glasses. "Elijah Brooks," she began, her voice firm yet calm. "You understand why we're here today?" The boy nodded but didn't speak. Caroline glanced at the case file in front of her. Another foster case. Another child lost in the system, shuffled from home to home, never staying anywhere long enough to belong. His mother, deceased. His father, incarcerated. There were no known relatives willing to take him in. She softened her tone. "Elijah, we're here to find you a safe home. A family who will care for you. Do you understand?" Finally, he looked up, meeting her gaze. His lips parted, his voice steady but quiet. "I already found one." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Caroline frowned slightly. "Oh. And where is that?" Elijah inhaled sharply, as if summoning courage from a place deep inside him. Then he took a step forward, his small hands gripping the edge of the wooden podium. "With you," he said. "You're my mom." The room fell silent. The attorneys, the court staff, even the social workers, all froze. It was as if time had stopped. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, stunned, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Elijah," she started, her voice quieter now. "That's not how this works." But the boy didn't waver. He held her gaze, his eyes filled with something she hadn't expected, certainty. "I know who you are," he continued. "You always do what's right. You help people. And you don't leave them behind." Caroline's fingers tightened around her gavel, the weight of his words settling in her chest like a stone. She had spent her entire career ensuring justice was served, making decisions that shaped lives, but never had she been placed in the center of one like this. She could feel the stares around her, waiting for her reaction. But all she could do was look at the child in front of her, the boy who had just turned her world upside down. The words lingered in the air, heavy and unshakable. "You're my mom." Judge Caroline Farrell stared at the boy, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The courtroom, which had moments ago been a formal and structured space, now felt suffocatingly silent. She could sense the stunned expressions of the attorneys, the social workers, even the bailiff. Everyone was waiting for her response. She cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. "Elijah," she started, keeping her voice even. "That's not something I can do. Judges don't take in children from their own cases. It's against the law." Elijah didn't flinch. He kept his small hands pressed against the podium, his eyes never leaving hers. "Laws can change." Caroline exhaled sharply, glancing toward the social worker assigned to his case, a woman named Rachel Dunn. Rachel looked just as shocked as everyone else, but there was something else in her expression, a flicker of understanding. "Elijah," Rachel said gently, stepping forward. "We've talked about this. Judge Farrell is here to make sure you find a good home, but she can't be the one to take you in." The boy's expression remained unreadable, but his fingers clenched the wood tighter. Then find a law that says she can. Caroline swallowed hard, feeling an unexpected wave of emotion rise in her chest. She was used to tough cases, hardened by years of difficult decisions. But this? This was different. This was personal. She tapped her gavel lightly against the bench, hoping to regain control of the room. Elijah, I understand that this process has been difficult for you, she said carefully, measuring each word. But this is not how these proceedings work. Then tell me how they do, he shot back. His defiance wasn't bratty or aggressive, it was desperate. He wasn't just asking for help. He was fighting for something. Caroline hesitated, her carefully built walls starting to crack. She had seen countless children come through this system, some resilient, some broken. But none had ever looked at her like this. None had ever asked for her. She closed the case file and leaned forward, her elbows resting on the bench. Elijah, can you tell me why you want me to be the one? His lip quivered, but his voice stayed steady. Because everyone else gives me away. The words were like a punch to the gut. The room felt smaller, quieter. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, and even the opposing attorney looked down, suddenly finding his paperwork fascinating. Elijah blinked, his small frame still tense. Every house I go to, I try to be good. I don't break things. I don't yell. But they always send me back. They say I don't fit. They say I'm too quiet. Or too sad. Or too much. And then I'm back here again. Caroline felt her heart twist. He continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. But you don't look at me like they do. You don't look at me like I'm a problem. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Caroline inhaled deeply, forcing herself to sit up straighter. Elijah, she said, her voice softer now. I need time to think. It wasn't an answer. But it also wasn't a rejection. For the first time since stepping into the courtroom, Elijah let out a breath, just a little one, just enough to show he had been holding it in. Caroline turned to Rachel. I want a full review of his case. Every placement, every file. I want to know why he keeps getting moved. Rachel nodded immediately. I'll have it on your desk by tomorrow morning. Caroline picked up her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. A sharp knock on the wood ended the session, but as Caroline stood to leave, she knew one thing for certain, this case was far from over. And neither was the feeling growing inside her. That night, Judge Caroline Farrell couldn't sleep. She sat in her dimly lit study, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Elijah's words echoed in her head. Everyone else gives me away. She exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. She had handled countless cases involving children in the foster system, but she had never questioned the process, until now. There was something different about Elijah, something unsettling yet profound. On her desk lay a stack of neatly arranged case files, but one was pulled forward, his. She hesitated before flipping it open. His records told a story she had seen before but never this close. Elijah had been moved through 5 foster homes in 3 years. The reports were clinical, detached, filled with vague justifications. Does not integrate well. Emotional difficulties. Lack of attachment to foster family. Caroline frowned. They made it sound like it was his fault. Like a child who had lost his parents was somehow responsible for not fitting into a home. She flipped through the documents, her eyes scanning through the details of each failed placement. One particular report caught her attention. Foster home number 3, the Hendricks family. Duration, 7 months. Reason for removal, safety concerns, details withheld. Safety concerns. That wasn't standard language. She checked the attached notes, but they were vague, almost deliberately so. Her stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. She picked up her phone and dialed Rachel Dunn's number. It was late, but Rachel had promised her the full review by morning. After 3 rings, a groggy voice answered. Judge Farrell? I need you to find me everything on the Hendricks family, Caroline said, flipping back to that part of the report. And I mean everything. Full background check, complaint history, anything that might explain why safety concerns are mentioned with no details. Rachel hesitated. I can try, but a lot of those reports are sealed. Caroline's jaw clenched. Then unseal them. There was a pause before Rachel sighed. Understood. I'll call you as soon as I find something. Caroline ended the call and leaned back in her chair. There was something else gnawing at her, the feeling that Elijah knew more than he was saying. She closed the file and stared at the ceiling. She was crossing a line by digging deeper, but she couldn't ignore it. Somewhere between the cold words in that file and the desperate certainty in Elijah's voice today, the truth was buried. And she was going to find it. Caroline woke up with a sense of unease that hadn't left her since yesterday's hearing. She had spent the night buried in Elijah's case file, searching for answers she wasn't sure she wanted to find. But now, as she stepped into her office at the courthouse, she knew one thing: she couldn't let this go. Rachel Dunn was already waiting for her, a thick folder in hand, her expression grim. I found what you asked for, she said, shutting the office door behind her. Caroline gestured for her to sit. Tell me. Rachel placed the folder on Caroline's desk and folded her hands in her lap, hesitating for just a second before speaking. The Hendricks family, she began, should have never been approved as foster parents. Caroline felt her stomach tighten. They had multiple complaints filed against them, Rachel continued, flipping open the folder. Mostly by previous foster kids, but none of the complaints ever made it past the system's bureaucracy. The agency handling their case marked every single one as unsubstantiated. Caroline leaned forward, scanning the pages of reports. The descriptions were chilling. Excessive discipline. Verbal and emotional abuse. Unexplained bruises. And yet, every complaint had been dismissed. Rachel exhaled, her voice quieter now. Elijah was their last placement before they were finally removed from the foster program. But it wasn't because of abuse allegations, it was because he ran away. Caroline's eyes snapped up. He ran away. Rachel nodded. He was found 2 days later in a convenience store parking lot, hiding behind a dumpster. When social services asked him why he left, he refused to talk. She hesitated, then added, Judge, he still never said what happened to him in that house. Caroline felt a wave of nausea rise. The quiet, watchful boy who had stood in her courtroom, who had looked her in the eyes and asked her to be his mother, he had been through more than anyone had admitted. She leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingers against her temples. This was buried, she muttered. Someone made sure it never got investigated properly. Rachel sighed. And if we dig too much deeper, we're going to make enemies in the system. Caroline met her gaze, steel settling into her voice. Then let's make enemies. Rachel gave a small, weary smile. I thought you'd say that. Caroline tapped her fingers against the folder. I want to talk to Elijah, she said finally. But not in a courtroom. Not in an office. Somewhere safe. Rachel hesitated. You mean somewhere he feels safe? Yes. Rachel exhaled. I can arrange a meeting at the group home he's in. Maybe in a private space, away from the other kids. Caroline shook her head. No. I want to take him out. Somewhere normal. Somewhere he won't feel like a case file. Rachel studied her for a long moment. You're getting too involved. Caroline didn't flinch. I know. Rachel let out a slow breath. Fine. But if this blows up, I never agreed to it. Caroline allowed herself the briefest of smiles. Understood. Later that afternoon, Caroline pulled up outside the group home where Elijah was staying. It was a gray, lifeless building with a rusting fence surrounding the yard. It wasn't a terrible place, but it wasn't a home either. She got out of her car, and within minutes, Rachel walked Elijah outside. He looked wary at first, shuffling his feet as he approached. But when he saw Caroline, something in his face changed, like he hadn't expected her to actually show up. "Hey, Elijah," she greeted, keeping her voice light. "You feel like taking a ride?" He didn't answer right away. He glanced at Rachel, as if checking to see if this was real, then back at Caroline. Finally, he gave a small nod. She opened the car door for him, and as he climbed in, she knew this was just the beginning. Elijah had secrets. And she was ready to listen. The car ride was quiet at first. Elijah sat in the passenger seat, his small hands resting on his lap, his posture tense. Caroline stole a few glances at him as she drove, but he kept his gaze focused outside, watching the streets blur past as if he were afraid to get comfortable. She had seen that look before. The look of a child who never stayed in one place long enough to believe it was real. "I was thinking we could grab some lunch," she said, keeping her voice casual. "You like burgers?" Elijah shrugged. "I guess." Caroline smiled slightly. "Good. Because I know a place that makes the best burgers in town. No pressure, but if you disagree, I might have to reconsider your judgment skills." For the first time, something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes. Just for a second. But it was gone before she could hold on to it. They pulled up to a small, family-owned diner on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple place with red leather booths and the smell of grilled meat wafting through the air. Elijah hesitated as they stepped inside, scanning the room the way someone might check for exits. Caroline noticed. She led him to a booth in the back, where it was quieter. When the waitress came by, she ordered a coffee for herself and let Elijah choose his own meal. He was cautious at first but eventually pointed at the bacon cheeseburger on the menu. "Good choice," Caroline said as the waitress walked away. Elijah sat stiffly across from her, his fingers lightly drumming against the table. "You don't have to be nervous," she told him. "This isn't a court hearing. You don't have to answer any questions you don't want to." He didn't respond right away. He just studied her, like he was trying to decide if she meant it. Then, quietly, he asked, "Why are you doing this?" Caroline set her coffee cup down. "Because I wanted to. And because I don't think you've had a lot of people in your life who made time for you just because they wanted to." Elijah didn't say anything, but something in his expression shifted. The waitress brought their food, and for a while, they just ate in silence. Elijah took small bites at first, but then, as if realizing no one was going to take his plate away, he started eating faster. Caroline pretended not to notice. It wasn't until his plate was nearly empty that she finally spoke again. "Elijah, I looked through your case file." His body stiffened. "I know you stayed with the Hendricks family for a while," she continued carefully. "And I know you ran away." His jaw clenched. "I'm not going to make you talk about it," she assured him. "Not if you're not ready. But I need you to know that if something happened there, if someone hurt you, it wasn't your fault." His hands curled into fists on the table. He wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes were focused on something distant, something not in this room. Caroline waited. She knew pushing too hard would make him shut down. After a long silence, he finally whispered, "They told me no one would believe me." A wave of anger rolled through her, but she kept her face calm. "I believe you," she said softly. Elijah blinked rapidly, as if trying to keep something inside from breaking loose. Caroline leaned forward slightly. "Did they hurt you, Elijah?" He swallowed hard. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, not at first. Her breath caught. He looked down at the table, his voice trembling. At first, they just ignored me. Like I wasn't even there. They only talked to me when I did something wrong. And then, they started making me sleep in the basement. Caroline clenched her fists beneath the table. The basement? She asked, keeping her voice steady. Elijah nodded. There was no bed. Just the floor. They said I was too much trouble to sleep in the house. A sick feeling settled in Caroline's stomach. How long? She asked. He hesitated. Months. She felt rage bubbling inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Elijah, she said gently, did they ever hit you? He hesitated. And that hesitation told her everything. I can't talk about that, he muttered. Caroline exhaled slowly. Okay, she said, even though it wasn't okay at all. You don't have to. Not now. Elijah didn't respond. He just pushed the last few fries around on his plate, his appetite suddenly gone. She let the silence settle between them, not rushing him. But inside, she was already forming a plan. Because one thing was clear now. Someone had hurt Elijah. And someone had covered it up. And she was going to find out who. Caroline had been a judge for over 20 years, and she had learned how to control her emotions, how to stay detached from the cases before her. But as she drove Elijah back to the group home, she felt nothing but anger simmering beneath the surface. She stole a glance at him in the passenger seat. He sat with his shoulders hunched, staring out the window, his expression unreadable. But she knew now. She knew the truth that had been buried beneath layers of bureaucratic indifference. Someone had hurt this boy. And no one had done a damn thing about it. By the time she pulled into the driveway of the group home, she had made a decision. Elijah, she said, turning off the engine but not unlocking the doors. He looked at her cautiously. I need to ask you something important. He tensed but nodded. If I open an investigation into the Hendricks family, if I make them answer for what they did, will you be able to talk about it? His fingers tightened around the fabric of his hoodie. Will it change anything? Caroline turned to face him fully. Yes, she said firmly. It will. Elijah hesitated, then whispered, they won't care. She softened her voice. Who won't? The people in charge. The ones who let them keep kids even after what they did to me. His voice wavered slightly. They'll make it disappear, like they always do. Caroline's stomach twisted. Because he wasn't wrong. She had seen cases buried under bureaucracy, had watched social workers fight against a system too broken to fix itself. The Hendricks family had been protected by someone who had kept those complaints from ever reaching the right eyes. And now, she had to decide how far she was willing to go. She reached over and gently placed her hand over Elijah's. I know it feels like no one's listening, she said softly. But I'm listening. And I promise you, I won't let this go. Elijah studied her for a long time, searching her face as if trying to find the cracks, the places where she might be lying. But whatever he saw in her eyes must have convinced him. He exhaled, then nodded once. Okay. Caroline gave his hand a small squeeze before finally unlocking the doors. As he climbed out of the car and walked toward the group home, she pulled out her phone and dialed Rachel. The moment she answered, Caroline didn't waste time. I need to know who covered up the complaints against the Hendricks family, she said, watching Elijah disappear through the door. And I don't care how deep we have to dig to find out. There was a pause before Rachel let out a low whistle. You're really going for this, aren't you? Caroline's grip on the steering wheel tightened. They locked a child in a basement, Rachel. And God knows what else. If the system let that happen, then I want to know who's responsible. Rachel sighed. All right. But you know this isn't just about one foster family. If someone protected them, it means we're stepping on the wrong toes. I don't care whose toes they are, Caroline said coldly. Another pause. Then Rachel muttered, I'll start looking. Caroline hung up and sat in the car for a long time, staring at the group home's front door. She had just declared war on a system that had failed too many children. And she wasn't going to lose. Caroline barely slept that night. Her mind raced, replaying every word Elijah had said, every red flag she had found in his file. She had handled thousands of cases before, but none had ever gripped her like this one. This was no longer just about one boy. It was about the system itself, how it had failed him, how it had failed so many others. By morning, she had made up her mind. She was going to tear the whole damn thing apart if she had to. By noon, Rachel was sitting across from her in Caroline's office, a stack of papers spread out between them. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her coffee untouched. I found something, Rachel said, rubbing her temple. And you're not going to like it. Caroline leaned forward. Tell me. Rachel slid a file toward her. The Hendricks family wasn't just protected, they were placed on a preferred foster list by someone inside Child Protective Services. Caroline's stomach turned. A preferred list? Rachel nodded. It's unofficial, of course. But certain families, usually ones with connections, get priority for placements. It's supposed to be for foster parents with proven track records, but in reality? It means someone with influence vouched for them. Caroline opened the file and scanned the names. One stood out immediately. Gregory Walsh. Her jaw tightened. Walsh was a regional director in CPS. She had crossed paths with him before, a man who smiled too much, talked about numbers more than children, and had a knack for making problems disappear. He signed off on their placements, Rachel continued. Even after multiple complaints. And when Elijah ran away, he personally closed the case and marked it resolved. Caroline clenched her fists. They were never investigated, she muttered. Because Walsh made sure they weren't. Rachel nodded grimly. And if you go after him, he's going to come for you. Caroline leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She wasn't naive. Walsh wasn't some low-level bureaucrat, he had connections, and people like him didn't just make mistakes. They made deals. She exhaled slowly. Do we have enough to expose him? Rachel hesitated. Not yet. We need more than circumstantial evidence. And if we move too soon, he'll bury everything before we can touch him. Caroline ran a hand through her hair, frustration burning through her. She had spent her career fighting for justice, believing the system could work if the right people were in place. But this? This was corruption at its core. We need Elijah, she said finally. Rachel frowned. Caroline. He's the only one who lived through it, she interrupted. If he's willing to testify. He's a traumatized kid, Rachel cut in. And you're asking him to go up against people who already destroyed his life once. Caroline's chest tightened. She knew Rachel was right. She knew Elijah had already been through hell. But he deserved justice. And if she didn't fight for him, who would? That evening, Caroline drove back to the group home. She wasn't sure if Elijah would even want to see her, but she had to try. When she walked inside, a staff member led her to a small rec room where the kids usually watched TV. Elijah was sitting in the corner, flipping through an old comic book, but he looked up when she entered. He didn't say anything at first. He just watched her carefully. Caroline pulled up a chair across from him. Hey. Elijah didn't answer. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. I found out why no one listened when you ran away. That got his attention. His fingers tightened around the edges of the comic book. It wasn't because they didn't believe you, Caroline continued. It was because someone made sure no one would hear you. Elijah's jaw tensed. He stared at her, waiting. There's a man named Gregory Walsh, she said. He's the reason the Hendricks family kept getting kids even when they shouldn't have. He's the reason no one investigated what happened to you. Elijah swallowed hard. So that's it, he muttered. That's why they got away with it. Caroline held his gaze. Not if we stop them. He looked down, silent for a long moment. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, How? Caroline hesitated, choosing her words carefully. We need proof. Something they can't ignore. And the only person who really knows what happened in that house, is you. Elijah's breathing hitched. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. I can't, he said suddenly, his voice sharp and panicked. He stopped, his chest rising and falling too fast. Caroline immediately softened. Elijah, I won't force you. She sighed. I want you to know that if you do want to tell your story, I'll be there. And I won't let anyone silence you again. He didn't respond. He just looked down at the comic book in his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. After a long silence, Caroline finally stood up. I'll be back in a few days, she said gently. You don't have to decide right now. She turned to leave, but just as she reached the door, his quiet voice stopped her. They locked me in the basement. Caroline turned around slowly. Elijah's face was blank, but his voice was small, fragile. Sometimes for days. If I made them mad. Caroline swallowed hard. What did you do that made them mad? His lip quivered. Nothing. A sharp pain stabbed at Caroline's chest. He exhaled shakily. They said if I told anyone, no one would believe me. Caroline took a step closer. I believe you, Elijah. His eyes flickered up to hers, uncertain but searching. After a long pause, he whispered, What happens if I talk? Caroline knelt in front of him, steady and sure. Then we make sure no one else goes through what you did. Elijah swallowed. He didn't say yes. But he didn't say no, either. And that was enough for now. Caroline had spent her entire career in courtrooms, fighting for justice, making hard decisions, ensuring that the law was followed. But today was different. Today, she wasn't just a judge. Today, she was fighting for him. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m., but Caroline was already at the courthouse by 7 o'clock. She had spent the past 3 days preparing, working with Rachel and a handful of people she trusted to gather every shred of evidence they could. Gregory Walsh had spent years covering up complaints, silencing children, and protecting dangerous people under the guise of efficiency. He had built his career on making problems disappear. But today, he was the problem. Caroline stood by the window in her office, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold, when there was a soft knock at the door. She turned to see Elijah standing there, dressed in clean jeans and a simple button-up shirt, clothes that actually fit him for once. Rachel stood behind him, giving Caroline a small nod before stepping away. Elijah hesitated at the doorway. Come in, Caroline said gently. He stepped inside, his movements careful, guarded. He had been quieter than usual since the night he had told her the truth. He hadn't agreed to testify right away, but he hadn't said no, either. And now, here he was. You okay? Caroline asked. Elijah shrugged. Not really. Caroline nodded. That's fair. He shifted awkwardly, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. What if, he swallowed. What if I mess up? Caroline walked over and knelt in front of him so they were at eye level. You can't mess up, she said firmly. All you have to do is tell the truth. That's enough. Elijah bit his lip. And if they don't believe me? Her chest tightened. Then we make them listen. He didn't answer right away. He just studied her, as if searching for something, some sign that she was lying, that she was like all the others. But then, finally, he nodded. Okay, he whispered. The courtroom was packed. Reporters had caught wind of the case, and though cameras weren't allowed inside, the public seats were filled with people whispering among themselves. Foster care advocates. Former caseworkers. Parents who had lost children to the system. And, sitting at the defense table, Gregory Walsh. He was a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair and a politician's practiced smile. He didn't look worried. If anything, he looked bored, as if this was nothing more than an inconvenience. Caroline had seen men like him before. They never thought they would lose. She sat beside Elijah, her presence a silent reassurance. When the judge called his name, Elijah hesitated for just a second before standing and walking toward the witness stand. Caroline's heart pounded. This was it. The attorney approached him, voice gentle but firm. Can you tell us your name? Elijah Brooks, he said, voice barely above a whisper. And how old are you, Elijah? 8. The attorney nodded. Elijah, can you tell us about the time you spent with the Hendricks family? A pause. Elijah gripped the edges of the wooden stand, his knuckles turning white. Then, softly, they locked me in the basement. A ripple went through the courtroom. The attorney nodded. Can you tell us why? Elijah's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Because they didn't like me. Caroline's nails dug into her palm. They said I was too much trouble, Elijah continued, voice steadier now. That I cried too much. That I wasn't grateful. The attorney gave him a moment before asking, how long would they keep you there? Elijah hesitated, then whispered, sometimes a whole day. Sometimes 2. No food. No lights. His fingers curled tighter around the stand. And if I told anyone, they said no one would believe me. This time, the courtroom wasn't just whispering. People were angry. Caroline stole a glance at Walsh. For the first time, his confidence faltered. The attorney took a deep breath. Elijah, do you know who Gregory Walsh is? Elijah nodded. Can you tell the court what you know about him? Elijah's voice was clear now. Stronger. He was the man who kept sending kids to the Hendricks family. Did you ever try to tell anyone what happened? Another nod. A social worker came once. I told her. He hesitated, then added, she said she would look into it. But she never came back. Rachel shifted uncomfortably at the prosecution table. The attorney walked to his desk and lifted a document. Elijah, do you recognize this report? Elijah squinted at it. Then he nodded. That's the report the social worker wrote after visiting you, the attorney explained. But we found something interesting. The official copy, the one filed by Gregory Walsh, doesn't match the original notes she wrote. Elijah looked confused. The attorney turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have evidence that Walsh altered official reports, erasing complaints from multiple children, including Elijah. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge glanced at Walsh. Mr. Walsh, do you have a response? Walsh stood, smoothing out his suit. Your Honor, this is absurd. The boy is clearly confused. The foster system is complex. Caroline couldn't take it anymore. She stood, her voice cutting through the noise. What's absurd is that you let this happen for years and thought no one would notice. The courtroom went silent. Walsh's face turned red. Judge Farrell, this is highly inappropriate. Inappropriate? Caroline's voice was ice. What's inappropriate is locking a child in a basement and covering it up. What's inappropriate is putting kids in danger because it's easier than fixing the system. Walsh's lawyer quickly whispered something to him, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge turned back to Elijah. "Thank you for your bravery today," she said gently. "You may step down." Elijah nodded, slipping off the stand and walking back to Caroline. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The judge straightened. "Given the evidence provided, this court will move forward with a full investigation into Gregory Walsh and his involvement in the fostering system." Walsh paled. It was over. Later that evening, Caroline sat on the courthouse steps beside Elijah. The sky was painted with deep oranges and purples, the air thick with the scent of approaching rain. "You did something incredible today," she told him. Elijah picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. "So what happens now?" "Walsh is done. The Hendricks family will never take in another child. And you?" She smiled softly. "You're free, Elijah." His fingers stilled. "What does that mean?" Caroline hesitated, then reached for his hand. "It means that if you want, you don't have to be alone anymore." Elijah turned to her, searching her face. "You mean?" "I mean," she interrupted, squeezing his hand, "if you want me to be your family, I'm here." A long pause. Then, finally, Elijah exhaled. A slow, shaking breath. And for the first time since she met him, he let himself believe it. "I want that," he whispered. Caroline smiled. Then it settled. Elijah leaned against her, just slightly. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running anymore. This story isn't just about one boy's fight for justice, it's about the reality of a broken system and the people willing to stand up against it. Elijah's journey is one of resilience, pain, and ultimately, hope. He was failed time and time again, silenced by those who should have protected him. But in the end, his courage exposed the truth. And that's what truly matters, not just the fight, but the fact that he won. Judge Caroline Farrell represents something powerful, the idea that justice isn't just about laws, but about people who refuse to look away. She wasn't supposed to get involved. She wasn't supposed to care. But she did. And because of that, Elijah didn't just survive, he found a home. This story reminds us that real change doesn't come from the system itself, but from individuals brave enough to challenge it. It's about standing up, even when the odds are against you. And most of all, it's about the simple, undeniable truth that every child deserves to be believed. Every child deserves to be safe. And every child deserves a family.